All right, welcome to the September 18th Club Cubase Google Hangout. I'm going to do a quick audio test, make sure that audio is being transmitted. Just bear with me for a moment. All right, so it sounds like audio is going through fine. My name is Greg Undo. I'm the host for the Hangout today. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America as a representative for Steinberg products. And I'm based in the United States, outside of Washington, D.C. and Alexandria, Virginia. And I'll be kind of hosting the Hangout today. And if you haven't been on a Hangout before, how it works is you could send questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de, or you can enter questions live in the chat field. For those of us that are watching the Hangout live, please feel free to introduce yourself. We will get started probably in about 10 minutes after the hour. We will get started. So if you're watching the replay of the Hangout, you may want to skip ahead. So if you're watching this live, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and where you're from. And we'll let some people get logged in, and then we'll begin. So we'll go through the questions chronologically as they appear in the Hangout feed. So in the chat area, so the questions will come in faster than my ability to answer them. So I will get behind in the Hangouts, but we will try to get through as many in an order as we could possibly get through. If we could try to avoid, if you don't see your question answered immediately, if we could try to avoid asking the same question repeatedly, that helps speed up the process. That'll make it. And sometimes when asking questions, if we could indicate, like I'm running Cubase Pro 10.5 or Cubase Elements 8 or Cubase Artist 9.5, sometimes that information is helpful for the question and which platform you're running, whether it's Mac or Windows. So those things will be helpful. Like many people working during the pandemic, my family is at home, so my wife is working above me, so you may hear her on a conference call. My son is at one of his classmates' house for the first part of the Hangout, kind of doing a pandemic pod kind of thing, sharing some resources. But he may come in towards the end and, tell me about something. So I'll apologize in advance for any interruptions. But with that, let's go ahead and see who is present on the Hangout. So, all right, so seeing some great familiar faces. All right, so we have Vinny from Orlando, just thanking me for sharing knowledge. We have Ace from Texas, Terry Dean, who's from the Netherlands, Ted Springman from Sherman Oaks. We have Neil from Greencastle, Pennsylvania. We have Sir Robert from Atlanta, Georgia. Good to see you. Longtime Steinberg fan, as well as Robbie Bowling from Dallas. We have Agent K, who's always kind enough to do moderation for us when we need it, so we appreciate that. Agent K never says where he's from, so we'll have to check it out, but we appreciate his efforts in helping out. All right, so we have Matt from Fort Wayne. We have Jason from, I believe he's Northeast England. He says, I believe it's South Shields, if memory serves. We have Pablo from Spain, from España, from Galicia, I believe. All right, good to have him back. All right, so we have Sub 403. Okay, so we have Taylor from Pine Grove. Good to see you again, Taylor. Okay, so let's see who else. All right, so we have Millard Brown from Pennsylvania. We have Paul from Lynchburg. We have Soren from Sweden. All right, so we have Stephen from Portland, Oregon. Hope you're safe from the fires. Jay from New Haven. John Costigan from Kenosha. Hope you're doing well as well, and things have settled down in Kenosha, hopefully. Okay. So see questions on the Akai controller. Okay, so we see from Kerwin Young that everything's working now. That's great. All right, so we have CJ Perez from Trinidad. Always wanted to go there. Had a neighbor who moved there with the State Department when I was a kid. But I got your question, so we'll go through that. All right, good to see Jan from Stockholm. We have Greg McCarty from Portland. Good to see you on Hangout. I hope you're safe from fires. Okay, so I see a question. Could I ask a question? So yeah, just ask a question in the comments field. All right, so we have Glenn from Virginia Beach. Hope you got the video link I shared with you, Glenn. Hopefully that helped with getting your reverb. If not, let me know and we could go over it again, but hopefully the video. All right, so we have from South Africa. All right, we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. All right, we'll let some more people get logged in. All right, so I see a question on syncing project visibility into Mix Console. We'll show that. Okay, glad to see that little video tutorial I sent to Glenn helped. You just want to know how to integrate his external reverb unit with his Cubase. All right, so we see from Drop Zone Inc. I love my Cubase 10.5. That's great. Thanks for sharing that. And before we get started, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, to the Cubase channel, make sure you do that so that we could actually make sure you're aware of different hangouts that are going on. All right, so we see Rich from the Cubase Club in St. Louis. That's great. I miss going out to see you guys. All right, so we have Ethiopia. Okay, we'll get started in another minute or so. All right, so we have Finland. All right, so we have some more people getting logged in. And hopefully later tonight, if everything goes well, I will be able to have the index of all the topics that we cover posted in a timeline field. Okay, so see question autosave. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with our questions. Thanks for all the great questions from everyone. So it says, hi, Greg. Hope you and your family are doing well. So yeah, we're doing great. Thanks. So in Cubase 10.5 with UR22 only has one input, but now I want to combine both VSTs and old MIDI hardware, TX, Yamaha 808. What do I need to mix record? So if you want to do, if you wanted to work with a lot of different external hardware, so I'm not sure if it's maybe if it's a TX, there's a TX81Z, I think might be an older one. So what a lot of people will do is take the audio out of the tone module or the synthesizer, let's say the TX or Yamaha or an 808. I'm not sure if that's all one particular unit, and they'll take the audio out of that and put it into a mixer. So they'll record the MIDI information into Cubase, and at that point, be able, to combine the outputs of the UR22 into the mixer, as well as the outputs from the TX into the same mixer, and record the MIDI. And eventually, at some point, you probably want to take the audio from the TX or the external instrument and be able to re-record that as, the MIDI information that's, sent to the instrument. The instrument generates the tone. You probably want to capture the tone that's being generated directly as an audio file in Cubase to preserve it. Many people will take the audio outs of their devices and put it into the inputs of their audio interface, and you could run that as like an external effect. So if we go to your audio connections, go to external instruments rather, and then you can tell where it's physically connected, with what inputs that's going to be connected to. So if you have two inputs, you could leave those kind of patched if you're doing all virtual instruments, but at some point you may want to capture the audio. So I would keep everything in MIDI, and when you can, just, if you don't have a little mixer, take the outputs of that and record it as audio directly underneath in case you need to change the MIDI, because if you need to change a chord or something like that, or just the timing of an individual note, it's much easier in the MIDI domain. But, some people have audio interfaces with a lot of external inputs so that they could take their instruments and be able to kind of patch them directly in. But if you just have a 2-input and you're kind of balancing the inputs from your instrument with the inputs that you're going to be recording, like guitar or bass, something like that, then you may want to, as soon as you record the MIDI, just, record it as audio and take the audio outs of the instrument to the stereo input connected right into the 1/4-inch connections on the front of the UR22 and just capture that as audio so that you could have it. So like in my studio, I have a lot of external MIDI modules, and so I have like 2 MKey, I think it's an LM3204 mix consoles, and those will, so I have 64 channels of, of analog, of mixer channels for external synths. So if you have a lot of external synths, a lot of people still seek the MKey 3204s for that specific reason. All right. So we'll move on. So you see just a comment from Ted Springman. Says, welcome to the living, breathing addendum to the Cubase operation manual. So he's been keeping all of our index stuff organized. So it says, congrats to Greg and Team Undo for their milestone 9,000 questions we've answered in tutorials and Hangouts. So it seems like a lot of work. It makes me tired reading that. But thanks for keeping track of all that. So see, comment from Terry Dean, I need some coffee. Yeah, I miss coffee shops. So hopefully one day in America we'll be able to go back and hang out in coffee shops again. Okay. So let me go through. All right. We're going through some introductions here. Okay. Hi Greg. Hi Bass Heads. Question: is there a way to add my custom VST and effects folders? I've created my favorites folder in the right panel. So one of the things that you can do to kind of organize everything is, with effects, what you could do is go to your studio menu and go to your VST plugin manager. And at this point, we could add a new collection. So we'll just say, I'll do an empty collection and I'll just call this September 18th. And at this point, I could just, drag and drop and go through my different VST effects. Like I want my amp simulator, and we could just drag this over directly over. And at this point, we could choose to also add folders. So if you wanted to add a folder, and we could call this amps or whatever, and then you could take these particular plugins and put them into your amps folder. So once we have everything kind of our plugins organized, let's see if this is reflected once we have this. So if we go over here to our media and we go to, let's say, VST effects, at this point, all of those will be carried over from our VST plugin collections that we've made. So these are the only ones that kind of show up. So we could have your favorites, just created as a collection in the VST plugin manager. Again, that's just, you initiate that process by doing a new collection. And when that's the active collection, that's what shows up here as your available option. So if I wanted to switch my different connections, let's say to default, where I have everything, then the active plugin collection that we have is reflected here on the right-hand zone. So once you take the time to make your own VST plugin collection, that should really kind of speed up your process for you. And they're available in the right panel, kind of in the same organization order with your own folders and nested folders, etc. So a question: anyone know if the Akai MK3 Mini works well with Cubase? We have lots of people using the Akai controllers, so I don't think it's any problems running that with Cubase. Okay. All right, so we see Jazz Dude is on a Hangout. He's always incredibly helpful. Has a great Discord site for helping Cubase users, and sometimes helps people before I get a chance to get there. So great to see you on the Hangout. He's from Heidelberg, I believe, in Germany. We see that Soren has an injured eye, so I can commiserate with that. I have eye problems as well, so hope your eye injury gets better. Okay. Hi, Greg J. from New Haven, Connecticut. Yamaha has a Waves sound grid card for consoles. Is there any chance Yamaha and Steinberg would work with Waves for a Steinberg sound grid interface to offload DSP? I haven't been, I'm not that familiar with the sound grid concept. I know I got an email message that I have to return. I think it's someone from Waves through Dweezil Zappa. So I would have to give him a call. I haven't heard of any particular plans for like a DSP assisted interface, though. But I'll pass that on. But that would probably be developed by our Yamaha colleagues. Okay. All right, so we have another question about, on the Akai MK3. So maybe if there's another user that has an Akai MK3 controller, if they could share their experiences, but pretty much they all work pretty well. Okay, going through. just reading. All right, so we have people checking in from Greece and Brazil and El Salvador. I see comments that Portland is a little less smoky today. That's good news. Okay. See, great comment from Ted Springman. This is like a group of violinists telling a violin maker how to improve their sound. As a double bassist, I can understand that very well. All right. Okay, so we have a question 10.5. How to sync track visibility zone settings from mixer page to lower zone on track page. So if we have a project, I'll just jump to over here so we can show this a little easier. So let's say if I have this particular project and I want it to have, and one of the great things that you could do in Cubase is have different visibility options. So if you wanted to just hide particular tracks, let's say I just wanted to see drums, that when I do this, we could hide our drum tracks. And when we go to, let's say, our mix console, I'll just hide my input channels. I may still see those particular tracks. So when we go to the mix console, we have just in the visibility tab here, we could say sync project and mix console. So if I have these hidden here, we could go to the mix console and those will be in sync. And I think if we click on our zones and visibility here, that this, or let's say if I just click on my track, that this is automatically going to deal with the lower zone here as well. So at this point, when I hide particular tracks, the lower zone will hide them. So those will be, you could have different settings for each of the mix consoles, but I believe by default that this setting is automatically synced with what we have in the project. And it used to be, I want to say just like, so I think that's really all you have to do, that it's automatically synced with the lower zone, as you could see. So if I wanted to hide all my drums, I could do that. So the track visibility is automatically in sync with the lower zone mixer. So I think that probably answers the question. So, all right. So, Greg, would love to see a tutorial on a correct way to use the remote control editor when you have time. So there's kind of two different remote control editors. So usually, the remote control editor that a lot of people talk about is, and I'll discuss both of them a little bit here. So let's say if I go to a particular plugin, let's say if I open up a delay, you could, and let's say if I have like, a Yukon control surface or some other, like maybe a Nuage control surface, a Yamaha one, and you could just kind of right click on the plugin itself and go to the remote control editor. So depending upon, if you're using like a System 5, a WK Audio, an Avid S6, an Artist Series, at this point you could determine which plugin parameters will show up directly here. Now, a lot of times when people, these control surfaces aren't, the most widely used, they're incredibly powerful, but, as a friend of mine told me, sometimes the air is thinner at the top of the mountain. So if you're just doing where you wanted to have like a remote control editor, this is also kind of a generic remote editor. We could go to your studio setup and we could click on the plus sign, and here we could add the generic remote. So once we add a generic remote, we could click on it and assign our particular MIDI interface that we see here. We could see two different columns. So this is going to be the incoming MIDI message, whether it's a MIDI note, a slider, a knob that you move, anything that's transmitting MIDI. And this is what that function will do. So let's say if I wanted to have a key on my keyboard that would open up the mix console. So when I hit a particular key, the mix console opens. So I could select my incoming message. And if you don't know exactly what MIDI message is being assigned, click on Learn. And all you have to do is just hit a particular, like a MIDI note, and that would capture the MIDI note. So what we want to do is say that this MIDI note will now come over here, go to, let's say, we'll say command, and I think we could just go under devices and choose to, let's say it's going to open up our control room mixer. So now when I come here, I could just hit that MIDI note, and that function will automatically just open up the control room mixer. Or basically, I think there's about 3,000 user assignable functions inside of Cubase. So that's another way of kind of doing some remote control editing. So we could think of this as being kind of something more permanent. So if and I know people that just have, a dedicated MIDI controller for kind of go-to functions. And all they have to do then is, just as they hit a key, they could change their quantizer value and do a lot of different functions just based on incoming MIDI messages. So hopefully one of those is kind of what you're looking for, TJ. All right. Question, can you set up Cubase to autosave every time after you record something? It's not set up to do it after every time. So if you record audio, that's automatically going to be saved directly to the hard disk. MIDI will wait to be saved until you save the project. But there is a preference that you could have set up. So if we go to your preferences, and I believe it's under General, that you could have an auto save, and you could set this to 1 minute. I think you could probably even set it to, every 30 seconds, or every, 6 seconds if you want it, or looks like every 30 seconds. You could have it where it'll just automatically save based on that. So it's not where it's automatically saving it after, but there is an autosave function, but it's not after every single track or data has been recorded. All right, so we see Danny checking in from Netherlands. Okay, so we have a question. Could you go over assigning parameters to note expression? So let's go ahead and I will just go to a particular project here. Let me activate it, and I'll just open up a retrolog instance. So just add an instrument track. Let's get a retrolog. Okay, and I'll just take this out of a monophonic. Let me just find maybe more of a pad. Okay, so when we wanted to add different parameters to note expression, so if we have just like a pad recorded. So let me just solo this, and I'll just quickly record just a pad sound, just some long chords. I'll take out a cycle. Sorry about that. So I'll just kind of hold down a basic chord here for a while, and we'll say we want to modify this using some of our note expression data. Okay, so I just have one chord, and now what I want to do is to go to my note expression. So you'll have kind of some of the different, volume, panning, tuning, and for synthesizers, you could have, cutoff, but you could, very easily just kind of add a lot of your own, some of your own functions here, depending on the instrument. So if you wanted to just add, modulation. So at this point, I could just say, I wanted this low note to, and we'll just make this a little larger. And this works with like VST 3.5 instruments. So I will choose, let's say, volume. So once we do this, you could go to all of your controllers set up and have any of these parameters available to select from. So I'll just say volume. And now as I just wanted to draw in particular notes, I could say, let's just so I'll just take the low note in a chord and have that change volume. So you can hear the low note kind of kicking in. So, but let's say now I wanted to take this particular note and adjust the tuning. So I'll select a tuning parameter, and now I could just kind of draw in so take that and so the one note in a chord is changing. And let's say for the top note, I just wanted to be able to adjust maybe the resonance. So I'll select the resonance here. And we can see what that sounds like. And let's say I wanted to do cutoff, kind of maybe going the opposite direction on that one particular note. So we could have kind of the controllers based on individual notes. In different synthesis forms on individual notes. But whatever you wanted to add, you could just, again, just come over here. And then I think if you just click here, you could choose the different parameters that you wanted to work with in your different MIDI CC messages. So that's how, and then for every single one, you could choose to actually just, see, we'll say, so we could see kind of all the note expression data on top of the notes here as we kind of look at them. So, but again, just kind of click to the left of the parameter, and then you could just add whatever parameters that you want. And that's really kind of the genesis for a lot of what MIDI 2.0 is really kind of designed to do. Okay, so it says we have a question, how you use program change in VST. So a lot of the VSTs don't necessarily work with program changes per se, and it seems a little odd to me as well. Some of them may respond to program changes. I think some VST3s don't, but you could just come over here and select, your program change, and if it does select program change, I know earlier instruments would, you could just enter the program change in directly here, or do that within the list editor. But a lot of times we found that a lot of people, didn't necessarily need to switch. They would just do a different track because there's no real fixed limit to tracks. So okay, just my chat field jumped. Let me sneak back up. Okay, so hey Greg, I have a visually impaired friend who's considering buying Cubase elements. He sees poorly on the screen. Are there some easy to use tips for a friend to try making music on Cubase? There's a lot of things that you could do, within the operating system to kind of make different elements happen. If he's kind of visually impaired, I've worked with a lot of blind people over the years, but my dear friend Greg Lukens, he's like probably one of the most amazing audio people in the world, and he's completely blind, but he's still faster on most computers. And I've gotten to help Stevie Wonder over the years with his Cubase setup. So we'll do a lot of different things. So there are, and I haven't done this in a while, but probably in the user accessibility parts of the interface, you could have stuff where as you hover over it becomes much bigger. I've helped out people whose vision was they're basically going blind, and there's a lot of settings in both Windows and Mac to kind of facilitate and make all the text bigger. So a lot of people do that, and but the way that a lot of people work who are blind with Cubase is using a screen reader. But if they could still see, just knowing the keyboard shortcuts. So watching Stevie Wonder run his Cubase, he's incredibly fast because he knows his keyboard shortcuts in and out. And that's why we have the capability of creating your own user definable keyboard shortcuts, because anything that's better for a blind person is better for someone that could see as well. But there's a lot of capabilities within the operating systems so that visually impaired people or blind people can work their computer, and it's fascinating to watch. All right, and see Terry Dean kind of indicating the same thing. Okay, so question is follow up from Tuesday. Still having trouble getting imported MIDI drum events to align inside the editor. It ends up in a different position from the grid. Is there a setting maybe? Paul, if you want to send a project to me, that could be helpful as well. If you want to send me like a download link to a particular project. But let's say if I have, a lot of drum parts, when we drag them in, make sure that as you drag that you're not, that it's not being dragged. Like we have the snap turned on. So I'll just undo that. And let's say I have my snap disabled. I'm sorry if I misunderstood your question from last week, but let's say if I had the snap disabled and I drag a pattern, I may So it looks like Cubase is trying to snap it to the beginning of the grid, but make sure that it's actually snapped directly to the grid. And one thing, if you notice that, so if I do this, like when I drag it from Groove Agent and we solo it, it's going to just align perfectly to the grid, kind of as expected. So if I want to, let's say, select that and duplicate it, and then if I change the tempo, these events will automatically just kind of follow right along. So let's say I want to do 128. So, and one other thing that it could be, if you're doing tempo changes, make sure that you have the track, and usually MIDI tracks by default will do this, but make sure that that particular track, you see this little icon here for musical mode. So if I have this in linear mode, I could be playing back the track, let's say at 128, and then I change my tempo to 100. This would still play back in the same positions. So make sure that it is set to musical mode, and then it's going to follow the tempos. But if this got switched to linear mode, or if it was dragged into a project that was in linear mode, make sure that's in musical mode. But if you wanted to, send a download link, Paul, to a project, I'd be happy to take a look at it. And you could send me a download link to Club Cubase at steinberg.de. Okay, we have a question from Ivan. Good to see you on a Hangout. Okay, so the question, how does one change a key command combination that involves command, option, or control, and a click on, let's just say a fader or a track? I've seen it referred to as option plus click, for example, but I can't seem to find the ability to change it in the key commands. So some of these key commands are kind of set in preferences for like modifiers, for kind of like editing preferences. So you may not see it in the traditional key commands area, but where you want to look at is if you go to your preferences, Ivan, and you'll see tool under editing, select tool modifiers. And then, with the selection tool, you can say, okay, instead of option for this, I wanted it to be, a different key command. So, and, instead of option, I wanted the modifier to be, different. So I would look here. And so instead of, like, if I wanted this to go to the default value, and if I wanted this to be option instead of command, I would just now click assign. And then you could just change that particular modifier key for a particular editing function. So go over here to your preferences, to editing, to tool modifiers, and that's where you could set those modifier keys. So give that a try, Ivan, and let us know. I hope you're doing well. I hope your son is doing well too. Thanks for joining the Hangout. So it's a question from Ted. Having Moogs in my rig, I'm curious if a software program like Cubase is capable of translating CV to MIDI and a reverse, or is this limited to the physical device? I think it's going to be limited to the physical device. But I'm not, I could do some more research. I'm not so up on, I'm probably a little ignorant on like CV. But I think it's going to be just within the physical device. All right, and I see Ace had kind of sent a question, so we did cover that one about the UR22 at the very beginning of the Hangout. Okay. Okay, so you see, hi Greg, question, logical preset is not there when I'm in Cubase 10.5, but in Cubase 10, logical preset is there as normal. How can I bring them in Cubase 10.5? Where do they reside in Cubase Windows 10? Thank you. So if you go, and I'm on a Mac, so it's hard to show, but if you go to like the little start menu here in the lower left-hand corner, and then you go to programs, you'll see like, where you could start Cubase, right, from like the program group, I guess they call it. I'm probably using the wrong terminology. If you go to the little Cubase folder, open that up, you'll see the Cubase executable, and then you'll also see something that says Cubase application data folder. So open up the application data folder, and that's going to be where all of your preferences for Cubase are stored, and go to presets, and you'll see presets for both Cubase 10 and Cubase 10.5, and just copy the presets for the logical editor over from over from the Cubase 10 to 10.5. And if it doesn't do that, I know John Costigan, I believe, had this issue. And he just had it solved. So maybe John, if he's on a Hangout, I saw him check in earlier, maybe he could check in and share exactly what he did. Okay, so we see a comment from Taylor. Thanks for the last Hangout tip. I used a profile manager from 9.5 and got all my preferences back in 10.5. That's great news. Thanks for sharing, Taylor. Glad that worked out for you. Okay, so we're seeing from Patrick. Hi, Greg from Sweden. Thanks for all your great work. It's been a joy being able to help people. So I think yesterday was our kind of, since we started doing our Hangouts in the pandemic. So I think it was our 6 months of Hangouts. So in the last 6 months, it's a lot of questions. So you see Ted has been keeping track, and it makes my head hurt to realize there's like 9,000 questions covered in videos. So, but I'm glad it's helping people. Okay, so from Silverling Virtual Studio, random. I'm using a UR824. It's a wonderful interface. How do I set up the output in Cubase so I can send a signal to a pair of monitors? Really, all you have to do is, make sure first that you have in a studio setup, that you have in a VST audio system, that you have like your Steinberg UR824 selected. That's the first thing you want. After that, go to the audio connections from your studio menu. And if you're running, you could just go to your outputs and choose to route, outputs or monitor 1L, monitor 1R, or output 1 and 2, depending on the terminology that you see there. With Cubase Pro, I would set a stereo output and go to the control room and right-click and add a monitor. And so it seems counterintuitive at first, but you could have your outputs here set to not connected, but physically defined, and then set up your outputs here, and that's where you want to do the routing. So, and then you could just have it set to just the outputs on your UR824, and it's pretty straightforward. So question, is there any way to save presets or any other solution under audio connections, external effects for saving different routing? So there really, it seems like kind of an oversight, and I've brought this to the attention of, during testing and with product planning, that there isn't a way to really save the external effects and external instruments as presets. I think if you start with a template, that that template would include all of those. And I think the reasoning that it's been explained to me in the past is that they want those, they kind of intend for those to be set so that if you did let's say you rendered a track through an external processor and then you undid it, that they would want this sound to be in the same state as it was previously. So that's kind of the reasoning, but I think it would be really wonderful to just, be able to save a preset for these so that you could patch in different external instruments and effects freely within the same session. So I haven't found a way to really do that. Okay, so question from Taylor. Working with a UA Apollo in a friend's studio, when adjusting the volume in the UA, Cubase stops playing or recording. Any idea how to prevent this? So, depending on the audio interface, you may want to go to your studio menu to studio setup and select in the VST audio system and just check release driver when application is in background. So if you go to like the UA mix console program, that may interrupt, or if you go to a web browser and you try to play like a YouTube video, basically one of these, the programs can be set where they're trying to hold on to the audio interface. So I would try to just, again, go to your studio setup, select the VST audio system, and make sure that release driver when application is background is checked. Okay. What is a quick way to delete a clip in a track? Selecting a clip and pressing delete does not work on a Mac, so I will select it here and just hit delete. That seems to work for me. So let's say if I have these selected here, I'll just duplicate that. So let's say I select these and hit delete. That works. So I'm not sure if maybe you had it reassigned in the keyboard shortcuts, but so I'll just kind of come over here and hit delete and make sure that under edit, delete, that keyboard shortcut is set to, so here I just have delete or backspace. So that seems to be working on my Mac without any issues. So make sure that the keyboard shortcut hasn't been changed somehow. Okay, question from Sable Winters: how to split a track into pieces rather than add different effects to each slice. You may not have to actually split them. So we could show you kind of a different way of doing this. So let's say if we have like a drum loop here. So you could do a lot of this through kind of offline processing. So let's say if I wanted to come here, I could just hit F7. Always one key off on my modifiers in this particular Mac keyboard. All right. And then I could just say, I want to take that and run it through an effect. So let's say, okay, I want this to run through a Revelation reverb. I want this kick to go through a delay. I want this part to be reversed. So again, I'll just come over here to process, reverse. I want this to fade out. So just come over here, and you could also just choose to process. So let's say, okay, we want that to fade out. So now if we go back and listen to it, we'll have our so as you can see, just kind of quickly And let's say I want this to do a flange. So I'll just come here and go to like a modulation effect, but I didn't have to actually cut it. So when I come over here, I'll just, let's run that through flanger. And let's do another delay on this. It's a mono delay for 16th notes. So now I can just above our flange. And the beautiful part of this is I could actually just save this when I save this project and open it up like 10 years later. I could say, oh, that was all cool except the reverse. And I could delete the reverse without affecting any of the other processes. So at any time you could, go back, 10 years later, 10 minutes later, and each of those processes could be undone in a non-sequential, non-linear manner. And you could just come over there and delete all and be right back to where you were. So you don't even have to cut. You can cut the pieces if you want, but it's not necessary. So I see a question, will there be a feature coming to make the size of the video render much smaller? So I think that they're looking at incorporating different algorithms, but they wanted to make sure that was going to be, the most compatible way of having the video playback on as many systems as possible. So, but I realize it can be big for a lot of people for the file size. Okay, so we have question, mixdown option, update display. Are there any advantages using this? Increased processor, higher risk to mixdown can fail, or is it negligible? I like the option for noting peaks, luffs from Jan. So I don't think that there's going to be really any downsides to it. And I think any of the differences that you'll run into will be negligible. It's just really a personal preference. Okay. Hey, Greg, how do I save my current mixer state as a workspace and then create another workspace? Thanks for the brain refresher. So we could do this through Mix Console Snapshots. And a lot of times this can make sense doing this probably before you get into a lot of automation. So, sometimes, people, the snapshot is a snapshot. So it's not like a moving camera. So let's say if I come here and this is like, I see a lot of people may build up a mix, and if they don't have confidence in it, they may have everything set up here and they go, okay, I just did a quick throw up the faders, what I think works well. And you could come over here and just click on the camera icon. And let's say I start completely fresh. And sometimes it's like really good this is a good mix technique. You think you have it sounding great, do it all over again and see if you come over here, say, okay, now I have laid out and now, that mix sounds pretty good too. And you could come over here and take a snapshot. And let's say we wanted to do this for, yet another one. And let's say we've incorporated EQs and, insert effects. So I come over here, take a snapshot. And when we go to our different mix console snapshots, at this point, I could just say, okay, recall snapshot 1. And now that will just move the mix to that particular snapshot. And I could say, we're going to now recall snapshot 2. So I'll just go ahead and... So now snapshot 2 is recalled. Let's go ahead and recall snapshot 3. So we'll come here. Now we could get really creative and you could have up to 10 snapshots, but you could also come over here and say, you know what, just on selected channels, recall only the EQs from a particular snapshot. So now when I go, I say, you know, I want to keep the volume levels from snapshot 3, but I wanted the EQs from snapshot 1. Or I wanted the send effects, or I wanted the inserts from snapshot 2. So, you know, being able to kind of utilize your snapshots, and when you go into kind of the full mix console, you could actually see your snapshots and you could label them whatever you wanted to. So this will, you know, enable you to never make a real final decision on your mix process, because you could second guess yourself all day long. But, you know, I've seen a lot of mix engineers will do that and they just kind of throw up a quick mix and it's like, oh, it sounds great. Okay, I'm just going to, you know, that was too easy. I'm going to start over, but I wanted to be able to get back to where I was in case that was magic. So that's when you could use mix console snapshots to be able to have like workspaces that are freely configurable. Right, good to see Gareth K music on the Hangout. I'm glad that the stereo pan law solution from the last Hangout did the trick for you. Excuse me. All right. Okay, so just see probably a further clarification from TJ. So let me just scroll up. My chat line just jumped. So you just kind of clarified he was thinking more of the remote control editor that allows you to assign pots on external devices to a soft synth and effects controls. You know, another way to do that is, let's say if you have a software instrument. So let's say if I have RetroLog open here, is you could have, you know, a lot of MIDI controllers will have, you know, 8 sliders on them. So I'll just go to my studio setup and I'll go to generic remote, or rather VST quick controls. So when I go to my VST quick controls here, I could assign, or my track quick controls, I could assign different faders. And again, there's the learn function. So move, you know, so let's say this is set to, you know, control 32, and all of a sudden I click on learn and I move my slider. I could now assign these track quick controls. So as we go to a particular track quick controls, you know, you could come over here and just be able to, within the instrument itself, so let's say we go to our RetroLog, we click here, I could say, you know, I really wanted this to be in a particular quick control. So I could say, we're going to assign this to quick control slot 1. So now as I move my one slider, that's automatically controlling that. Now, if you're doing it for an audio track, let's say if you have a plugin on a particular audio track, you could also do kind of similar concepts. So let's say we have a plugin that maybe doesn't have a, you know, a right click to learn MIDI CC. So I wanted to come here to, let's say, a Bit Crusher, and what I wanted to do was go to my quick controls, and you could click on this little L and you could move the parameter. And at that point, that is assigned to the slot that was selected. So as I move, you know, so you just kind of move the parameter with L with the active slot, and that will assign that parameter to your quick controls. So I have like 8 quick controls, and then I just have sliders, and I could configure kind of whatever you want for particular quick controls. There are presets. You could make your own presets as well. So, you know, if you're like, okay, I always want it to be volume, pan, low cut, high cut, the frequencies, and sends 1 and 2. Or I always wanted this, my 8 faders on my MIDI controller to be my 8 sends. And now I could control them as I see fit. So these types of things with quick controls for most MIDI controllers work very well. Okay, see a comment from Terry Dean, Note Expression Editor. Great stuff. Thanks. Yeah, it's a great one to get your MIDI, way more expressive. So, and Terry's also indicating I always thought the volume was the main volume of the patch. With the VST 3.5 instrument, you can think like Retrolog, Pad Shop, Hallian Sonic, Hallian Sonic SE. That is on a note by note basis. So, all right, good to see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas, on the Hangout. Okay, we have a question from David N. Hi, Greg. Using outputs and inputs, how can I record MIDI and audio as a real-time track to track bounce recording back in the same Cubase session? I've seen it, but I can't find a YouTube video demo of it. So let's say if I wanted to, I have Retrolog selected here. All right, and if I wanted to record both, I think, let me just... Sorry, just get this... my chat field just disappeared on me. Let me just see if I can get it back here. Sorry. All right, so bear with me. I'm just going to get my chat back to where I was. Okay, so it says, how can I record MIDI and audio in real-time track to track like a bounce recording? So let's say I have my Retrolog going here, and this will work with, and what I could do is I'm going to select that track, and I'm going to say add effects channel track to selected channels. Or not effects channel, but rather group track. So I will right-click. We're going to add a group track to the selected channels, hit OK. And what I want to do now is to add an audio track. And this audio track, I want to set its input from group 1. So I can record both audio and MIDI. So what I'm going to do is we have the MIDI information, and I will just come over here, hit record. And now I've recorded both the MIDI and captured the audio in real time. So again, what you can do is just from that particular instrument, route it to a group or add a group channel to the selected channels. And at this point, add an audio track and set that input of the audio track as the group channel. So the audio output is from the instruments going into the group. The output of the group is going to the input of the particular selected audio track. I see, from about the question about CV, and I'm not that familiar. I don't have any CV enabled synths, but it's a question from Ted, or a comment from Ted, is I presume CV is faster than MIDI and likely finer in resolution. I'm not sure if it is, but I'm not totally familiar. I don't have any CV devices that I've played with. But it maybe actually not have the same resolution as MIDI. Okay. Hi, Greg. Question. I need to work with the pitching of vocals, but the music track given to me was produced with a tuning of 432 hertz. Is there a way to do so in Very Audio? If not, what can I do? What I would try to do is if you take all of the audio, and if it's all audio, it's pretty easy, but you could come over here. So if it's recorded at, 432 hertz for A, is I would just come over here, select all of the audio in the particular track, and just adjust your fine tune up to like 8. And this would have it play back at 440, and then any of the tuning that you do can automatically, in Very Audio, when you adjust it to be in tune at 440, you could just simply have that play back have it play back at once you've done the editing, you could do the editing at 440, and then you could just simply, do the transpose down again. So select all the audio files, and not in transpose, but rather in fine tune, adjust it up. So play around with that, and I think you can get it to work. Okay, so you see from Gareth K. Music, controllers on individual notes, revelation of the day already. Thanks, Greg. All right. And we got it within the first hour, so my goal is complete. Okay, just reading through comments. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. How do I change the name of an audio file? It seems I can do it from the pool page, but it adds a new name after the original name instead of deleting the original altogether. So I think let's come over here, and I'll just come over to a new audio file. So I'll come here, and let's just call this September 18th. And I will go ahead and just record, create a file. This file will be called September 18th. Okay, so if we now wanted to change the particular name of the file, now you could come over here, and in the info line, if we select this, there's one that's called description. So I think if we just come here and change the name, so let's say June 12th. Or maybe in the description here. So now when we go into the pool, I'll just change the description. That way you can see which one it is. All right, so it's going to be just by changing the name here. So we just called it, into file. So if I wanted to come here, let's call this just. So, and then, the file names just change there. So you just can go to select a file, and from the info line, and if you don't have the info line visible, all you have to do is just make sure that the info line is turned on, and in the file, just type in the new name that you want it to be. Okay, just reading through comments. Thanks for all the great questions. If you've learned a new trick, make sure you hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that. Okay, so we have a question. When I import a loop from MediaBay, it is out of sync, although I have syncing activated. So it could really depend, usually, if you have syncing activated, it may not do that for you automatically. So let's say if I have my tempo, let's find just a drum loop here. Okay, so I'll just drop that into my timeline. I'll just drop it into an audio file this time. That'll help. All right. Okay, so, generally it's not like a sync mode that you turn on, but rather it's just kind of placing it in musical mode. So if I come here and I don't have it in musical mode and I hit play, I'll just turn this up, sorry. So if I wanted to play that with a click, but now as soon as I enable musical mode, that's going to automatically follow the click. So I will without musical mode, it's going to play back at the original tempo out of sync. And once musical mode is turned on, then I'll just snap this to so if you still don't have it in sync, it could be that the actual loop is maybe has the wrong metadata for the tempo embedded in it. So if that's the case and you don't know, what you could do is just listen to the loop and count how many bars it is. So let's say we're in 4/4 time. This is 16. And if you need to figure out what the loop is, you go to your project tempo, go to your project to beat calculator. And with the beat calculator, at this point, you can say, okay, it's 16 beats, and it'll say, okay, it's 100 beats a minute. And that will do that, and we could go directly to your pool window, and at that point, we could choose to, I think it's going to be this, and you could update the particular tempo as you work with it. But let's say if it's not in musical mode, I do the same thing. So we say now that file, we'll go to our project and go to our beat calculator, and we say this is 16 beats, and it will automatically come up with the tempo for you, and then just update that in the project window. But if you say you turn sync on, it's not sync that you turn on, but it's rather just placing it into musical mode, and maybe you're enabling sync by putting it into musical mode. But if it's still not syncing, it may have the wrong tempo information, and you could see what tempo information there is in the pool window, just in the tempo field right there. Okay. Hi, Greg. I'm trying to free warp some audio samples, which are all in triplets, but the grid looks like it's fixed to 16th. How can I change the grid to triplets in the sample editor window? So unfortunately, the sample editor window, when we go into our free warp, doesn't really show. So as we go into free warp here, it's just going to be set to 16th notes and 8th notes, and it's not going to really show triplets, unfortunately. So I've mentioned that in the past to kind of the powers that be, see if they could have that changed. Because we could have it kind of changed on the project window, but not within this sample editor, unfortunately. Sorry about that. Okay, so Greg, if and when I get system link to work, does that mean that SPDIF will forward me to effects sends? If I use ADAT, will I have 8 effects send tracks? I'm going to use second computer purely as effects rack. Thank you for any info. You know, you could route the audio back and forth, but you know, a lot of times, you know, depending on the effects, you could do that. And I'm still I have to go through my garage because I moved maybe about eight or 9 months ago, so I'm still let's see if I could dig up an interface with another interface that has SPDIF and find a power supply for it. So. Okay, just reading through comments. This is a great comment from Ted Springman. All Beach Boys music should be converted to 432 hertz because it makes pretty designs in sands. So that's a great comment. All right. All right. Now that Pablo's back, I'm back to being La Leche. Apparently, it's my high school Spanish. I was the milk, but apparently it's uh, a comment of admiration, supposedly. So. Okay, so John Costigan was nice enough to weigh in about the missing logical editor presets. He says look for a video on YouTube, something like recovering logical presets and MIDI insert presets as well. So, question from Sir Robert. Out of the 9,000 questions, was there something you discovered for the first time in a Hangout that Cubase could do? I usually discover 1 or 2 new things per Hangout. So there's a lot of things, sometimes it's just a different approach of how I wouldn't think of doing something. And you're like, oh, this, if you do this and this and this, that may get someone to the solution that they're looking for. So I usually, as I've said in the past, I learn new things on, I think, every Hangout. So I'll let you know if I learn something new in this one. I'll point it out to make it obvious. So you go, wow, I can't believe Greg didn't know that. To see some people asking about Ambient Dave. He hasn't been on a Hangouts for a while. So if anyone hears from him, please send him all of our best. And we hope to see him on a Hangout soon. Hopefully the temperature in his trailers have gotten cooler with the moving into autumn in the northern hemisphere soon. Okay, we have a question. Not hearing the other instrument in VST Connect in my Cubase 10. How to set up the track. So, when you're doing the VST Connect, make sure that I don't have my second computers kind of not in my studio where I sometimes have that set up. But let's say if we go to our Create VST Connect, and once you have, or maybe I'll just to call it up. Let me just, a lot of times people get hung up on because it could activate your talkback mic. So make sure that, let's see. I'm just going to reread it, make sure, so when you do this, like let's say if I was sending like a Groove Agent project, a Groove Agent file out. So if you're not hearing the other instruments, I'm not sure if it's the instruments in VST Connect in my Cubase 10, how to set up track. So, so the instruments are being sent out of VST Connect is once you come over here and you say, go to your VST Cloud and you go to VST Connect and you'd say, create VST Connect here, that would add the track for you. But the tracks that are going to be in your project, what you want to do is as we go to open them up is, go to the Q sends and make sure that, they're going out to the Q send. So this will go through the control room. So to have the audio sent out from the particular instrument, from your Cubase to the performer, it's going to be routed through the control room, and the control room will need, so you'll need to take the whole mix that you have here and route it out of the control room. And that's what the performer hears. And then once you have this set up, you're going to add an audio track, and its input will be set to VST Connect. And it seems counterintuitive, but you will probably want to bypass monitoring on that particular track. Then when you hit record, the audio gets sent out over the web to the performer. It's going to be synchronized with their audio interface, with their buffer settings, and then sent back. So you may hit record and it may be like, a couple hundred milliseconds for that connection to occur, but everything will be kind of in time. But and one of the things, when you're doing this is you'll hit the talkback mic, and that will enable, communication. So a lot of people leave the talkback on, and then, it's like, why can't I hear anything? Is just they forget to turn the talkback off. So make sure you do that as well. But that should hopefully help. Okay, so just reading through comments. Okay, so we have a question from Taylor. Can you show us how to render a video file? So let's go ahead and take a look at that. And this works in Cubase Pro 10.5, and I think maybe Artist, if I'm not mistaken. I haven't looked at it recently. So let's say I've composed a horrible soundtrack to a particular video area here. And at this point, I wanted to actually just export, my role is in this queue is to do the music for this particular section. So I've created the music here. I have video that's like a before this particular queue and after this particular queue. So now all I had to do is choose to do an export video. This will take the So I'll just give it a name. We'll put it to desktop. Just take my stereo out. We'll say export. And at this point, it's going to do a mix down of all the instruments, all the files. And when we go to our desktop, at this point, this will be the video that we just exported. So it just kind of takes the start and the end of the file, and then boom. So that's really kind of all you have to do is just set it up and just do file to export video. And if you don't see export video, it is a Windows 10 thing. So, we see this sometimes. Windows 7 users will complain. It's like, I got 10.5 and I want to export video. And it's really just a Windows 10 particular feature. So, but that's all you have to do. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, could you please explain a little bit about expression maps? Let's take a look. Okay, so when people are creating instruments, we see this a lot in orchestral music. You'll have different instruments that, to emulate the different playing techniques of instruments, like how an instrument is tongued, how an instrument is bowed, if it's pizzicato, if it's going to be short notes, if it's going to be more legato, long notes. So all those different aspects will often come available in different sample libraries. So then the problem gets to be is how do you manage those articulations? So if we wanted to take a quick listen to this is that Hallian Symphonic Orchestra. So if I wanted to look at like the violin part here, and what we're going to do is just, and we could look at, this is coming from our Hallian Symphonic Orchestra sound set. And so when I go to look at it, we could go to the expression maps and we could just choose to import the key switches. So what the expression maps show us, and the Hallian instruments can automatically import the key switches, which is so incredibly useful. So you don't have to spend hours you can make your own expression maps. But if the instrument does it for you automatically, that's, saves you just time. So here, when I hit, A-1, that would send trills. A# -1 would be spiccato. B-1 would be trills halftone. Trills whole tone, pizzicato at C#0, F0, espressivo. So if I wanted to just listen to this particular violin part and we wanted to change the articulations, so let's say on the shorter notes there, I wanted that to be set up for, let's say I want that to be spiccato, starting right there. And before it goes back to the longer note, I want that to switch to legato. So this will just change. So at that point, we could just indicate here, because a lot of times what happens pre-expression maps was that you would have lower notes that would not actually be part of the music, but the lower notes would trigger a key switch that would change the style or which samples were being triggered. And then you go to print out the score and you'd see all these low notes just kind of embedded directly in the score. But now we could just see that the legato, instead of those, which are actually MIDI notes, those legatos won't, these articulations are going to be just written directly in the score editor as well. So that's kind of what the expression maps allow you to do in a very convenient way. So if you're, we would see many composers that would have, a violin sound. It would have 30 tracks of violin 1, to get all these different articulations across, so that it could, sound more realistic to a particular performance of how a violinist would play it. And instead of having multiple tracks, we could just switch between all the different samples and have those samples, switch and have it all within one part and have that dedicated to the notation editor as well. Okay. Okay, so just see comment, wow, thank you for the effects on parts, bit or toot, saved me a lot of work. It's a wonderful feature, so, take advantage of that. Okay, my timeline jumped on me. Let me get it back. Okay, back to where it was. Okay, reading through comments. Thanks for all the great comments. And again, if you've learned something new, make sure you hit the like button and that you have subscribed to the channel as well. Okay, so I just see a question from CJ Perez. He had sent in a question via email, so let's go ahead and do that now. I think we only had one question this week. So the email CJ had sent, my problem is this. I currently have 8 outputs from my Zen Studio 2014 converter routed to 6 inputs of my unit audio summing box. Then the left-right outputs from that goes to channels 1 and 2 on my Yamaha N8 mixer for coloration. Then the main out from that goes back into my converter, so it's just a summed mix that comes back into the box. Also, I'm putting plugins on my master input bus, so I would want to hear the effect of these plugins so I can mix accordingly. However, my question is now, how do I monitor the incoming sound coming into Cubase without hearing the double sound? If I create a stereo track, then set the input, then click on the speaker icon, I get both the summed mix with the VST plugins coming through and the sound without the plugins mixing together with an annoying delay, which is not what I want. So how do I isolate only the summed input with the VST plugins on the master stereo input track? So hope I'm making sense. Any help would be appreciated. So what I would do is take kind of a different approach for this. And I would treat kind of the external analog path as an external plugin. So it's, I understand you're kind of going out to a summing and then it's being fed into Yamaha N8, which is a wonderful, beefy analog mixer. And then you're bringing that sound back in. So you're sending all of this sound from your project out to an external processing chain. You bring it back in. And then once you do that, and you want to be able to kind of monitor through that so that you can make your critical mixing decisions. So what I would do is just have that path connected. Here we go to your audio connections and just call it an external effects. So we will come here. Let's just add it and we'll just call it our summing path. So basically, and what you want to do is you're probably going to have this as stereo in and out. You tell it what inputs and outputs, which you probably already have going out of your converter, going into your summing box, into the N8, and the output of the N8 you set as the return bus directly here. So that would be your summing path. When you go to the mix console, all you have to do on the master fader is just go to your inserts, and you'll see under external plugins, you could just call it your summing path, and you could call this whatever you want. So as you've discovered that when you kind of go out into the real world and back, that there's going to be latency within that signal path. So at this point, click on this, and that will ping and measure the latency of that path. So going out of your antelope into your summing, into the N8, and back to the antelope, and that's going to measure that signal path and compensate for the latency. Now you could do it some other ways, like sending it to a different mixer channel, which is then being routed to, maybe a different monitoring path. But when you want to export the audio and take advantage and include your summing path, it makes sense to do it as an external processor so that you could have the latency compensation. And then you just put it on the path, and then you could just, bypass that path and say, okay, it's not going through that signal path. It is going through the signal path. And you could make your changes accordingly. And that way, when you go to render the file, it will render in real time because it's going out into the real world, so it's not going to render faster in real time. So, physics will still stand true, but it will incorporate that external path for you. So I would just treat your summing path as an external effects processor, and at that point, just define that in the audio connections as your external processor, and put that on the master bus. And that way, you could mix through it and not have the two different signals coming in that are off time. They'll be compensated for, and you have the benefit of using your external summing path as well. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. Okay, so I see a question from John Koskian. Hi, Greg. I can't send the web address, but the title, okay, this is probably for the video, is Recovery of Cubase Presets. Works like a charm, restored things you may not know or missing. And then I'll send a YouTube link to you, so if you wanted to just look for that, thanks for sharing that info, John. But if you want to send that to me, I think you have my email address. You can just send it to clubcubase@steinberg.de. And for the person, if you still have problems with your logical editor presets, you could email me and I'll send you the link. But again, look for Restore Recovery of Cubase Presets on YouTube. Okay, so I just see question from Steven. Why aren't there any bears in Africa? What is up with that? So I'm not sure if it's I don't know. So I'm not sure if it's a joke or what. It's a little out of context, but all right. Maybe someone else could chime in. All right, so let's move on. All right, so I see Michael Teams indicating that people should whack the like button. So I concur. So feel free to like the Hangout. That allows us to do more of these events. Okay. Question from Sub 403. What's the best way to find the key of a song? So a lot of times you could, if there's MIDI data, you could do that quite easily with a particular function. With audio, you may just have to, you could sometimes do, go to the bass line and, and actually determine if it's in a, do a very audio and figure out what the tonic is. You could do that quite easily, or just kind of, play with the, figure out what the first chord is if necessary. So there's some tricks, but I'll show you like a quick audio or a quick trick that you could do for MIDI. So I'll activate a project here quickly. So let's say I have a piano part here, so I'll double click and let's say if I want to look at it in the score editor here in the bottom. So I will just go to my project and go to chord track and say create chord symbols. I usually leave the first two checked and the bottom two unchecked. So I hit OK, and now this will make a chord track for us. And I can see that, okay, it's G, we have E minor seventh, G suspended fourth chords. And we could also see that it has, created our key here within the chord track. So at this point, it's indicating that we're in G major. So if you have like MIDI parts, you could select like a piano part or anything with chords or other parts, go to your project menu to chord track and create chords and create chord symbols. So there isn't really provisions for doing polyphonic audio. So, but for MIDI, it's quite accurate to do that. Okay, so let's I'm going through some more of the questions. All right. All right, so we have Stephen checking in. Greetings from Medellin. Okay, so a question from Keith Young. Question, Greg, I'm using a stock plugin bass, dark precision, but can't get any sustain or presence. Can you recommend some settings, other strip settings? So let's go ahead and take a look. I think it's probably a Hallian Sonic SE. Okay, so look under bass. Sounds like it's maybe an electric bass. Let me find the exact patch. Okay, so here's a dark precision patch. Okay, so just kind of playing that. I mean, that seems to sustain pretty well. So just kind of holding that down. And let's see if I have like maybe a bass part here. And I'll just copy it to this and I'll listen to it in context of the song. So let me just see if I have, sounds like I have the modulation wheel up. So let me just, so I mean, it seems like that patch has a lot of sustain in it. So let's do it in context. Sometimes, for more clarity on a bass, adding mid-range can help. So this seems to have. And let me just see if I could I'll just select. And I will just knock it up an octave and let's go ahead and listen to that in context. So this patch kind of has like almost like an octaver type of effect on it. So depending on the key, just doing some EQ. So listen to that in context. And sometimes using the VST bass amp, you could probably get some nice tones out of that under distortion. Go to your VST bass amp. And if you wanted to but just being able to without the VST bass amp. So, but I would try some of those things, and depending on the key of the song, and bass can sometimes be critical if you're hearing it in the mix, like what octave is it hitting, but that seems to sustain really well. So I'm not sure if you're running other compressors on it, but that particular preset seems to sustain well and hold. Okay, so I see just a question. I hear of an option that you can load a sample in a sampler and convert it to MIDI notes. So let's say if I have, I'll just do kind of maybe like a classic. I think one of the loops that I often use for this, I'll just kind of come in here and there's like a quick like Motown kind of bass sound. So if I have that one sample of a note, and you could do that out of a phrase, you could right click and just choose create sampler track. And then once you do that, we could and you could just play that one particular note. So, and just kind of play that. So any audio file that you want or any audio file that you have just like a little snippet of, you could just drag it right into a sampler track or just come over here and just right click and create sampler track, and then that's all you had to do to play it. So it's pretty fast and easy. Okay. All right. So good to see Captenergy Music. So question, how to set up another instrument in VST Connect from the control room. I can't seem to hear his keys. Does he have to have a compatible plugin for Cubase? If you have to, it's going to be, it would have to be, I'm not sure if the person is using a software instrument or if they're using a hardware instrument or if they're just sending you MIDI information. James, maybe if you could share that, that could be helpful as well. But, it would need to be, I think there's certain instruments that it kind of works with right out of the box. I haven't done a lot of the MIDI stuff, but I've done the audio a number of times. Okay, so it says, hi, I have one big problem with Cubase. When I record something on audio track and change the recorded clip to musical mode, it jumps to random position in time. So let's go ahead and I'll switch projects here. So I will just record some audio here. Okay, so let's say stop. I'm going to put it into musical mode and just selecting that didn't move the audio position. But so let's say if I change my tempo, it's just, it could be depending on what the tempo stamp of the file is. So let's say if I have it at 50 beats a minute and then switch it to musical mode, seems like the time position, make sure that, let's say if I put it in musical mode without the track being in musical format, but it seems like, the audio that I just recorded is staying in its time position, the start time, and we'll play back depending on the tempo. So if we go from 50 beats a minute to 150, it'll still play back at the same musical time. If I take it out of musical mode, it's still the same measures. So it seems to be kind of working as expected on my end, but let me know if I'm doing something differently than you. Okay, so you see James Daly indicate I have the Cubase 10, but how to his keys? He's on an iPad, so I don't think Well, it could be the performer. I would have to test to see if the iPad is going to work for virtual instruments the way. So I'm not sure if he's playing into a particular instrument, but it could be an issue doing it from the iPad, but I could do a test if you want to send me an email, and we could do it on Tuesday's Hangout, and I could give you kind of more definitive answer with that. Okay. Okay, so it says I can't hear what he's playing, but I hear his mic. So I don't have my iPad in the room with me, but I'll do some research on that. But it could be that maybe I haven't tried MIDI from an iPad to see if that works, but it might be slightly different. So. And I think you might have to set up the plugin in your Cubase and have him send the MIDI from his iPad over. So But I'll do some more research on that for Tuesday if you wanted to send me just a brain cramp email reminder. Okay, so just see a question from Havard Sethri or Sether. Thanks for doing this, Greg. You're welcome. Sometimes my screen is too small. Is it a way to scroll up through the status line, info line? Sometimes I can't see it all. So, having a different screen resolution is always helpful. So, like the screen resolution I'm running that I find works really well for Cubase and what I've become accustomed to is like a 1920 by 1080. But if you go to the setup, if you're missing stuff on the info line, what you could do, if it's like sometimes if your screen resolution, let's say, ends here, is you could actually just choose to, let's say if I'm here, I could just choose to move up, different parameters. So if I come here to my setup window and I'm not seeing all the parameters, go to the setup and let's say, okay, I want the invert phase to be more over to the left, select it and just choose to move up. And you could move that one parameter, in time or visually to be exactly where you want it to be. So you could see kind of particular parameters and you could customize that order for you. So if you have a smaller screen resolution, that's how you could kind of get it to see other parameters that may be kind of off screen. Okay, let's move on. Thanks again for all the great questions. All right, just going through my chat field jumped. So let me just. All right, so Ted just told me he looked up on Wikipedia that the CV has high resolution in MIDI. So that's my new thing I learned today in the Hangout for Sir Robert. Okay, so question. Hi, Greg. What is the best way to export my tracks for a mixing engineer so that my effects and EQ settings are included? Making stems. What is your advice? Mix engineer can't use Cubase. Thanks. So what I would do if you wanted to include all of your, effects and EQs, before you give them to the mix engineer, is I would just do a quick. I'll just open up this project here. So let's say I wanted to take this, like all these files here. Let me activate this project. And I would do a render in place. So you could tell your engineer to get Cubase. That'd always be a helpful thing as well. But let's say if I'm here, I'm going to choose all those. And let's say I'll just kind of roll this back to only... I'll just do just for time expediency. I'll do, let's say, 8 bars of this, and let me just globally select my range. And I'll just crop this quickly. Okay, so let's say this is my project and I have lots of EQs and insert effects that I wanted to be able to apply. So let's say we just throw on some horrific EQs for us just to work with so we can hear that it's worked. All right, so let's say I totally, done the worst thing possible to the kick drum, and let's put on just on a snare. Let's do something really obvious as well. Or the hi-hat is present here, so I will, let's put a flanger on the hi-hat. Something just awful. All right, so let's say all right, so I put all sorts of just obviously bad effects, let's say on the bass, So if I wanted to include these and give them to the mix engineer, I would, select all the files here and just do a render in place from the edit menu. And what you could do is just say, okay, I want to go to my render settings and say, okay, at this point, I'm going to include if I choose dry, it would be dry. Channel settings would include inserts, EQs. If you wanted to include I'll put a reverb channel on the guitars. So we could include a send effect. So now we can. All right, so now just horrific mixing choices, but so now we'll go to our edit menu. We have all these selected, and I don't want to select an actual event, but or a track. We'll try to select the events and come over here to render in place, and we'll choose our complete signal path. So this will include the aux sends, and I won't mix it down to one file. And when we do this, it'll just quickly render all the different tracks. And we could have the original tracks muted. All right, so just watch this render. Let's see, again, some messages coming in. Let me just check on those. Okay, we're working our way through it. So just do this once. So you could kind of do this for all of your tracks in one fell swoop. And now we'll have our kick. And let's go to our hi-hat. And let's say our guitar parts. So if we come here to, different guitar parts, you could just... So now when you play that, it muted the original parts. So that's how you could do it. So just select all your events and do a render in place, and you could choose at what level that you want to in the render settings. So if you want it to be no effects, you want it to be inserts, channel strips, and EQs, or send effects, or master effects included. So, all right. Let me undo that. Thanks again for all the wonderful questions. I'll revert this project here. All right, so let's move on. Okay, so just see a comment. Too bad this is a Google thing. I would have considered hanging out. Okay. Okay, so Jason is indicating that people should hit the like button. Okay, so seeing a message from Paul Claridge. Happy Friday, Greg. Thanks for all you do. You're welcome. I hope these are helpful. Okay, so we have a question. In Wavelab Pro 10, what's the difference between save as and export when converting an audio file? Let's take a quick look, see if we can get it figured out. Okay, let me just find a... Okay, so I will come over here. So let's say we have... Okay, so just remove some of the plugins. Okay, so let's say... So I think, so let's say if we, so what's the difference between save as and export when converting an audio file? So I think the export, once we choose to do the render here. So let me just, that might include the effects. Let's just give it a try here. Okay, so I'll just do, let's say this. Okay, and let's see if when we do an export, all right, so let me just Try again. Close the plugin. So we'll do a whole file as a name file, and okay, let me jump back to the edit view. All right, let me see if I can just put it into a different folder. Okay, I'm just going to try the export one more time. So I think the export might include the rendering, let's say, of the effects. So let me just... Okay, so when I come here, so I think the export will include the master section, and the save as won't, and that will basically render the files through the master section, and the save as will just save the file under a different name. So if you're like, save this to jazz edits, but it won't include the save as. I don't think it won't incorporate the processing chain that you have in the master section. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so I see CJ Perez is going to try out the external effects integration with that. So I think that should do the trick. Okay. Okay, seeing discussion of different animals in different continents. Okay. Okay, so let's see. I make EDM music, some tips to enhance my workflow in Cubase with samples and sound design. So a lot of times what you could do is kind of interesting as people will work. So let's say we'll start with a new project here, doing some like interesting sound design stuff. Like I remember I was hanging out with Ian Kirkpatrick, and he was just showing some cool stuff when I was at his studio last. So let's say if I just... So let's say, okay, I wanted to just throw a loop in. One of the cool things that you could do, is just from like a sound design aspect is, let's say I'm here... is you could actually in real time just choose to transpose using the transpose function. So I'll just put that into a quick loop. Just try out different sounds. And you could also just kind of say, okay, I want to take half of, let's say if I have half the loop here and I'm, let's say, not erasing it, I will come here but trying out different ideas, because you could slip the audio within the loop here as well. So let's say, let's say if we're just here. So if you just hold up, sorry, let me just. So I'll be here and let me just select this, but try also just experimenting. Let me just not have this in record. Sorry about that. And then you could choose to just slip and move the contents within the loop. You know, and if you wanted to just drop this loop in. And let's say, okay, we could duplicate this. And still you could, turn these into musical mode or not. But to be able to kind of come over here and just, slip. So if you hold down Alt and Option, you could choose, even if it's kind of the same loop, just have kind of different variations of that. So you could, have different feels of the loop. And then, obviously doing different filters for sound design can make a difference. So if you wanted to, if you could do the tuning very fast, but also being able to, okay, I just wanted to go to like an insert effect and choose different functions. So let's go to like a filter, so if you want to do like kind of, sorry, it just keeps going in record. So, some different creative elements like that, and you could take, maybe a different loop here, and be able to and, really do kind of like, extreme EQs, or just doing kind of offline processing. So I could just say, okay, I just wanted to go to my process and take this particular loop and reverse it. And so let's bring that down. So I could just, and if you wanted to apply a plugin to a particular thing, so let's say I could even do a process like pitch shifting. So, once you get into, if you hit F7, you could select a particular file, come over here and just say, okay, I just wanted to do pitch shifting on that. So at this, we could do like a time correction. So and I wanted to also come here and just process a plugin. So I wanted this to do like an auto panner maybe. So when I come to, I think it might be under modulation. So you can say, okay, I just wanted this to do an auto pan, and then you can just so those are a couple things you can do just, very easily, but, just being able to kind of slip the contents to come up with new and kind of different loops, just different variations. Something that helps a lot of guys that are doing, EDM stuff. So a couple tips and tricks. There's like a zillion of them. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. Question: how can I use my MIDI for tuning a vocal track? Can I use my MIDI controller? How? Thank you, bro. So let's go ahead and I think we have a project open already. That might work. So let's say if I'm doing kind of vocal tuning in a particular project here. So I'll just kind of go to the meat of it, and so I'll kind of blow it up to my full vocal tuning here. Let's get to the very audio. So if we wanted to come over here, we could also just say we want it MIDI input. So let's say if I come here, I could just hit, so as I do this, I'll just put this on. Let me undo that particular thing here. So I'll just come to this track, go to the very audio editor again, and you could just enable MIDI input. So as you sorry, my remote control, but you could just come right over here and just play and just hit a MIDI note on your controller and be able to hear the pitch and go to the next note. And be able to just kind of and select the pitch that you actually want to hear based on the MIDI note that you play. Okay, so we have a question. My new computer and Cubase does not find Halion Sonic Symphonic Orchestra. Where can I find it? So if you had an older version of Halion Symphonic Orchestra, so it used to be a standalone instrument, but for the last 7 or 8 years, it's kind of migrated. So you could download the license that you have will work as what's called the Halion Symphonic Orchestra sound set. So when we have an instrument, let's say if I add an instrument track here. So if you have the older one, download, and that's basically the sample set. So it's like a 10 gigabyte download. So download that, and you could just open it up. Let's say we have Halion Sonic SE. We could just click directly here and say, here's my Halion Symphonic Orchestra. And at this point, I want to go to my woodwinds, and I wanted to have an oboe, and I could just go to my oboe combination and be able to just, play the oboe sound just like that. So it'll show up inside of Halion Sonic SE, Halion Sonic, or Halion as kind of like a sound instrument set. So if you have previous generations versions, those won't work, but all the same sounds, everything will be indicated here in a nice unified interface within Halion Sonic SE. Okay. So I see from Ace, Greg, could you recommend a reliable external SSD or portable external disk drive for Cubase 10.5 for recording playback with low lag time? Thanks. A lot of my friends who, I see using, like, I think Samsung makes kind of a portable SSD drive that connects via USB 3 that a lot of people seem to be using for sample libraries and for just simple, easy expansion. So it seems like Samsung does, has the best reputation. I don't follow it, every day, but, I think when you talk to a lot of people, it seems like the Samsung drives for SSD are kind of, have the highest kind of reputations in the industry. Okay. All right, so we see a question. Hello, I'm a beginner. Can you please tell something about recording levels, gain stage, and headroom? Okay, so let's say if I have a vocal file and I'll just kind of set up, I don't have an audio input on my track, but I'll just kind of will fake it here and send audio directly in. So okay, so I'm just going to choose my group 2 there as an input source. So let's say if I was tracking vocals, and this was my input source here. So I will look at my, when you're tracking. So let's say for like my audio track, I like to kind of aim for like between -12 and -6 dB to kind of have headroom. Some people will try to smash it more, but if you have kind of varying dynamics, that's a good level. If you, record there, you have to try to artificially make up the gain, through normalizing. If you set your gain around here, that could probably be a little too high. But, think around like, roughly -6, -12 dB for your tracking. And that should give you kind of a lot of headroom. So that's kind of a good place to be. I know a lot of people try to aim for like kind of a -6 if they're handing it off to a mastering person. I know some people, after a lot of trial and error, who, they'll do their mix and then at the very end they'll just drop the master fader by 6 dB. So, there's different schools of thought, and it could really be very genre specific, so if it's going to be something that's very dynamic, like an orchestral piece, it could be different gain structure than something that's like more of an EDM dance track. So, different genres can have, but, those levels are kind of good places to work from where you're not kind of trying to fight yourself afterwards. Okay, so we have a question. If we start with a laptop in a field but want to move the project to a desktop in a studio, what is the best process for transferring, sharing full projects? Is there a cloud share transfer option? You could do it if you want to do it cloud based. You could just simply come here and do a VST transit. It's may not be the best direct way to do that, but what I would do if you have like a cloud system, if you have like a Dropbox or something like that, something that's very straightforward, you could choose to do a backup project function. When you start a project, just make sure that when you do a new project, you choose have a unique folder for every single project. And if you have a unique folder for every single project, every audio file, every file that's needed to open that project in a different computer will be self-contained within that folder. And you could just move that folder to like a USB flash drive. You can move the folder to Dropbox, to like an Ignite, to a Google Drive if you wanted to download it via cloud, or just take it to a USB flash drive and move that to the other computer. So if you were a little lazy and maybe you're a little sloppy with your file management within the project, and you have like maybe files from different areas and different folders, and you wanted to kind of clean it up and consolidate it, that's when I would do a backup project. And when you do a backup project, you choose a new folder. And when you get prompted, you'll open up and you could keep the current project active, but you could also minimize audio files. You can make all the direct offline processing, like we've done today, permanent. You could remove unused files, or you could choose not to back up the video. So, this would allow you, if you did 14 takes and you only used one of them, you don't want to back up 14 different takes. All you have to do is choose minimize audio files, and that way the 13 takes that weren't used will not be backed up. So you have some different options there to kind of speed it up. But if you wanted every single file that you wanted to do, you could just not choose those options and just but if you keep try to have every single project in its own unique folder, and at that point you could just move that folder however you want, to external drive, Dropbox, VST Transit, either, whatever you wanted to. All right. So I see from Keith Young, this may be from an earlier comment. Sorry. Says, sorry, Greg, forgot to mention it sounds muddy. Is that me? I'm not sure if it's the audio for the Hangout or if it's referring to a previous question. So maybe if you could indicate that. Try not to have muddy sounding audio. Okay. All right. So we see a question, another question for future Cubase. Do you think it'd be possible that Steinberg would add the option to switch, convert on the fly between mono and stereo tracks, like in other programs? I've seen it come up in discussion, so I'm not sure, I know that people are, it's been discussed. So, and it's come up in user surveys as well. So, they understand kind of the desire for that particular functionality. So, okay, it says the equalizer and the bass amp. So, but it could really depend. I think this is going back to our previous question. So, you can play around, a lot of times, getting your bass parts to work, it could really depend upon the key, but, I think that bass sound, dark precision, does have a lot. And when people are using like a dark precision sound, that's kind of the goal. Is a lot of times that fits perfectly within the mix, so that as you're doing that, you don't really have to worry about it, and it's not trying to take away parts from vocals or other frequencies. And that's why a lot of engineers like precision basses, because they just kind of stay in their particular frequency range and kind of don't encroach on other instruments. So, so if you wanted something that was a little brighter, you could try a different preset as well. Okay. Okay, so we see question, where are the recent projects stored? So I think if it's referring to this particular list, like the recent projects, I think this might be actually part of the operating system where it's stored. So I don't think that there's a particular list. This is just the order that these projects have been opened. So it's not a particular file. I don't think that will, that could be modified or copied over. See comment from Pablo. The sampler track from Cubase is very interesting. Yeah, it's incredibly fast for doing like different sound design stuff. Okay, so we see question. Also, where are the presets of the audio setup is saved? That's going to be just saved in your preference file. So you'll see preferences, presets, and then all the various presets will have subcategories. Okay, going through more questions. I've discarded earlier versions and now have 10 previous OMFs. Will not load. Error message. Must have software loaded, etc. Same with older back files. So it just says, okay, so I now 10 previous OMFs will not load. Error message. Must have software loaded, etc. Some with older. So I'm not sure if, make sure. What I would try to do sometimes if you're trying to double click on an OMF file, it may be referencing like older projects. So, if you come over here and let's say if we're in our documents, and let's say if I go to a project, all right, so let me just find my projects folder. Sorry, so I think. Okay, so I go to projects here. A lot of times you may just have to choose, if you're double clicking on an OMF file, you may just want to say open with and make sure that you have, the latest Cubase version. So that could happen with that sort of, but if you have Cubase already opened, if you haven't done this, try just going to import OMF. And at that point, that will import the OMF file for you in the current version. So if you're trying to just double click the OMF and have it launch Cubase, that may be referencing the file association in your operating system may be associated with the previous version. So try opening it within the program as the program is open. Question: how can you prevent MIDI editor window to close when you delete a selected MIDI container? So if I have, if I double click here and we see the MIDI here, this MIDI information that's in this container, and I delete that, it makes sense because that was what was selected to, that we saw here. So if you wanted to instead, select all the notes and delete, you can keep the container. But I think it makes sense that, if you've double clicked and this is the MIDI editor that you're looking at and you erase the part that it doesn't indicate that there's a part there. So try deleting the notes within the container as opposed to the container itself. Otherwise, there's nothing selected to edit. Okay. Sorry, just going back through my timeline. Hang on, I hear my son knocking on the door. Give me just a minute. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. So let me find my space. My timeline jumped on me in my chat field. Okay, all right. So I'm just finding my space. Okay, so I see a question on MIDI for tuning the vocal track. So we covered that already. So question: is there a way to meet or connect to someone that could help set up through VST Connect Pro, other than sharing a song like a VST Connect chat room or board? So if you want help getting VST Connect Pro set up, um, let me just read it again. So I just see. So I'm not sure. James says. So is there a way to meet or connect someone that could help set up through VST Connect Pro, other than sharing a song like a VST Connect chat room or board? So if you're looking for someone to, help you kind of remotely access your computer, like our customer support departments, I know in the US, they use TeamViewer to be able to remotely access different people's setups. So I'm not sure if you're looking for general help and general setup or specifically with VST Connect Pro. So if you could indicate that, but our support department does allow for remote screen sharing for access. Okay, so I see a question from Ace. Hi, Greg. How can I import my Steinberg Model E sound library from old Cubase? I have the physical CD, but when I ran installer Win1064, didn't process it. So if you actually go, let's see if I could just open up a web browser without messing everything up. But there is a later version of Model E that was released. So it's not a sound set, so it's an actual synthesizer. But if you go to under VST Classics, you could just kind of come over here and try just running there's a later version of Model E that's not on the CD, but you could try to just install that on your system. And I run it on my computer for older projects and compatibility. So just do a search for Steinberg Model E, and it was updated. And it's not supported, but it's in kind of what they call like a VST Classics or something like that, and it's now available free of charge. So, all right, good to see Jay on the Hangout. Okay, so I see, I guess, Havard. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Thanks, Greg. I think this is about the info line that solves it. That when I'm in a place with a low resolution display. So I'm seeing James Daly. Just what is my email address? So you could reach me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. That's kind of the contact email for the address. So once again, clubcubase@steinberg.de. So let's see, JVI question. I want to learn in depth about Halion and Retrolog and Groove Agent. What do you recommend? Really need help learning these powerful tools. Thanks. So there's a number of, I think my colleague Andy Shrave did a bunch of videos on Halion 6 that are quite good. There's a very good Dom Segalis, and these are all on the Steinberg channels. video. It's pretty in-depth on retrolog, and I did, I think, 5 or 6 different videos on Groove Agent. So just go to the Steinberg. I think if you go to Steinberg Media, but just go to the official Steinberg YouTube channel, and then there's kind of different sub channels for Cubase, Dorico, Wavelab, virtual instruments, and look into virtual instruments. And then you should see like different tutorial videos in there that are pretty in depth. Okay. Okay, so hey Greg, emailed you from a couple of Hangouts back. Did you ever find out what folder to place user track picks in for use in every session? So yeah, I think we covered that in one of the Hangouts. So once we come to, let's see, and I might be able to find which Hangout we covered it in. Let's see if it's, because I had a project that kind of showed that. All right, so let's say if we wanted to do a track picture. So all you have to do is when you go to the track pictures, select import. And then you could, just come over here and find a particular file anywhere that you want. Then when you go to, so let's say if I say, okay, I want like this beautiful Warwick fretless, one of my favorite instruments. So if I want that as my track pictures, then when you go, let's take a quick look. So once you import a track picture, we could come to, and it'll be in kind of your library. So I think on a Mac, it'll be in your application data folder. So if you go to Cubase to library, you'll see Steinberg, or you could just see in the library, you'll see Steinberg, and this will be in content. So you go to in the content folder, and on the Mac, it's going to be in application or library application support, and it'll be in the Cubase preferences folder. But you go to content, and then you'll see under VST sound, then user content track pictures. Now this won't exist until you choose to import until you import one user track picture. Once that's done, this is automatically created. So if you go to, on Windows, if you go to like your start menu in the lower left-hand corner, like your globe, and then go to programs, to Cubase, open up the Cubase folder group, and then you'll see like the Cubase program, and then you'll see application data folder. So go to the application data folder on Windows, go to content, and you'll see under VST sound, user content, track pictures. And that's where you could place a whole collection of pictures in different track pictures. But again, you could just kind of double click and it will automatically, as soon as you import a track picture, that folder path will be created for you. And then they'll be just in your user content. So if you just import, these will be global for any project that you work with further down the road. So hopefully that helps, David. All right. Okay, so So I see from Michael Teams, still not clued in on separating MT drummer loops into individual tracks. Thanks for all you do. So I'm not sure if it's what MT drummer loops is, Michael. So maybe if you could specify. So if that would be helpful, if and I could probably still get to it before the end of the hangout. So we still have about an hour or so to go. Okay. Hi, question here. How can I use the sounds of a previous real drum recording to be triggered as samples in a new song? Okay, we'll show you how to do that. So let's say I have a drum recording. So let's say I have like 3 kicks, 2 snares, etc., and I wanted to build like a groove agent kit of it. So I could open up an instance of Groove Agent. And I will just cut the kits here. So if I want to, I'm going to go ahead and let's just kind of zoom in. So let's say these are my 3 kick drums. I'll turn off snap and I'll just grab my range selection tool, select from the top. I'll take those sounds there and I'm going to drag it to a pad. So I'll just say, let's put it onto C1. So I will have these 3 different samples. So really that's kind of all you have to do is, let me just cut this really quickly. Hang on just 1 second. So cut, drag, and then you could just have those particular samples, on the particular pad. So, or if you wanted to, you could even just, just drag and drop samples straight onto the pad. You can choose different start and end positions if you so want. And once you have, all of your different drum samples done there, all you have to do at that point is, so let's say I'm going to take these 3 and I will just go ahead and, let's say just for my range tool, I will crop. And you could even do stuff like, okay, I just want to bounce the selection of those, replace. Take those, drag them right in. So those are the 3 different mics, and what I could do now is choose to layer them. So I could have, that's just kind of and we could do kind of the same principle for snare. And then once you're done with that, just simply export the kit with the samples. And at that point, you could call it up on any project. So you could just drag and drop portions of audio files directly onto the pads in Groove Agent and save that. And that way, as your drummer's doing sound checks, he's conveniently, as he's, you're testing the mics, he's conveniently doing a sampling session for you. Okay, so we have a question why some of the sounds on Halle Symphonic Orchestra are so loud and some are so quiet. So many of the sounds on the Halle Symphonic Orchestra, so I'll just add one here. You may need to see kind of dynamics control to start with. So let's say if I want to go to, let's say, let's do like just maybe oboe. So you may just have to move the modulation wheel. So when you go to edit, you'll see this thing called expression controller, and you could switch this to various CCs. I think it defaults to your modulation wheel. So if you're playing, it's like Y. But move your modulation wheel up. So you could use your modulation wheel. So just, if you have a patch, it's like, why is it so low in volume? Just move your mod wheel. And then that will aid in the expression and give you more dynamics. So you can think of that as, the conductor. You could change your modulation wheel basically into the conductor and control your dynamics like that. Okay, I see people are dancing like Napoleon Dynamite to my EDM attempt there. All right, so okay, just reading through comments. All right, so we see Gareth is back, has his connection restored. It's probably 35 minutes ago. Okay. So I'm seeing with the drives, some people are recommending like for the external. I think it's a Samsung T5 and a Samsung Evo for internal. I think those are internal models. Okay, so see, having trouble with my DAW recognizing VST plugin, Superior Drummer 3 suggestions. Make sure that you have, you'll see if you see it in the VST plugin manager, it may be blacklisted. And make sure that you have this 64-bit version and not the 32-bit version installed. And that if you have a VST3 version versus a VST2 version, you can see that indicated with the VST version column here. So if you have the 64-bit and VST3 isn't required but is kind of ideal at for better compatibility. So it could be that you have a 32-bit version of Superior Drummer, and that could cause problems and wouldn't be recognized. Okay. Okay, so just see question. Thank you, Mike and Uncle. Using URRT2 with gain all the way up. Dynamic mic needs phantom, and new condenser mic didn't produce a signal with phantom on. So it seems, I wonder if. So the URRT2, there's no pad switch on that. So, but generally, you don't need dynamic. For dynamic mics, you don't need phantom power. That doesn't increase the gain at all. And a condenser didn't produce a signal. So you'll see like a little software applet. Let me see if I could find. You'll see something like a DSP mix effects, and this probably won't work because I have it. I'm using it, but you'll see something like this. And if you go to the mixer levels within, make sure that the gain isn't adjusted here, like is all the way off in the software mixer. So there's a software mixer level for your URRT2, and make sure that the gain isn't kind of adjusted all the way down in the software mixer. So you could just come over here and just choose to initialize data, and if it's going to be like a software control, that will kind of reset it. But if you at all used kind of that function, if you experiment with that if that is down, that could have an effect and could be causing what you described. But the dynamic mic shouldn't need phantom power, and so I would check that. Okay. Okay. Hi, Greg. This is Oren Bynum. Good to see you, Oren, on a Hangout. Miss seeing you at Washington Music. Can you show an example of how you can send out your music to different normal formats for music licensing libraries? So if you're doing it, each library, and I haven't really done this in a while, but when you go to export audio mixdown, they'll probably, I'm sure that, when you do it for the library, they may say, give us a 24-bit 44.1 WAV file or 24-bit 48K or an MP3 file at this particular, resolution. So, you could say if it's a WAV file, you can pick and choose your sample rates and bit depths here. If you choose it to be like an MPEG 1 layer 3, which is an MP3, at this point you could have different settings for your MP3 options as well. So, but check with each library service and see. I don't do projects for library services, so I'm probably not the best person to ask, but I'm sure that they would have kind of like expected file formats that they're kind of wanting to see. And if you give them that, then they should be okay. And it could be different for each service. So, if you're doing something, for one library publisher, it could be different requirements. But I think most of it's going to be probably 24-bit 48K. But, just check to see what everyone else is asking, because I'm sure they would rather tell you than try to spend a bunch of time fixing it afterwards. Okay. Okay, my chat field jumped on me. Okay, so I think I'm back to where I was. Okay, so this may be a follow-up to a previous question. Hi, Greg. I use a separate folder for each project, but sometimes Cubase will put the rendered audio files in the audio folder from a previous project. How can I make sure? So what I think you want to do, before you do anything, if it's like to make sure all the files are in there, just go to your pool window. And within your pool window, you could right click and there's going to be just a, prepare archive function. And this will move, all of the files, that are used in the project. If they're in different folders, just hit prepare archive and that will move it all within the same project folder. So it'll all be consolidated for you. Okay. So see about the URT2 questions as reinstalled drivers using 10.5 Pro and just submitted a trouble ticket. I'm a quieter singer. Any recommendations on an additional preamp for vocals? Thanks. So, definitely try like the built-in DSP mix effects and try just to set it back to normal, Elizabeth, and see if that does a trick for you. Okay, let's just go on through some other questions. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. What will best help reduce computer processing load? Is it increasing RAM or CPU speed? Yes, both of them would definitely help, but it could depend upon the project and the type of plugins that you're using. So if you're doing like, a orchestral piece for if you're a film composer, you probably want to have a lot of RAM and fast hard drives for the sample playback. If you're doing mixing with lots of reverbs, that's when the processor can have more of an impact, and like the audio coming off the hard drive could not be as that's not going to take as much resources, and it could not, in using RAM, it's not going to use RAM for reverbs generally. So depending on the types of projects that you use, so if you're doing like lots of sample based VST instruments, RAM and having a fast solid state drive can have a bigger impact. If you're mixing like rock bands and doing lots of reverbs and complex modeling, then increasing the CPU can help with that. Having an increase in both is obviously kind of the best, but it can really depend upon the type of work that you're actually doing. So, okay, so we see. So I see a nice comment from John Costigan. This Steinberg 64-bit Model E is an exquisite emulation of my old Mini Moog, except it doesn't need a 2-hour warm-up to stay in tune. So yeah, I remember those days fondly, or not so fondly. So, but yeah, the Model E is just a wonderful instrument. So. Okay. Okay. See, question. I keep trying to upgrade to PadShop Pro, but it keeps saying error. Depending upon the version that you're running, if you have Cubase 10 that had just PadShop and PadShop Pro added the capability to have samples be imported into that. If you have 10.5, that comes with PadShop Pro, or it comes with PadShop 2, and PadShop 2 includes the sample capability. So if you're trying to upgrade from PadShop that comes in Cubase, or if in Cubase 10.5, which is PadShop 2, you may get that message because that is trying to update PadShop 1. So if you could let us know if you actually which version of Cubase that you're using, because it could be that you are trying to upgrade something that you already have. Okay, so I see, going back to Michael Teen's questions, MT Power Drums, just a MIDI drum program such as Superior Drummer. So I think the question was like to get those drums kind of separated onto individual tracks. So you could do it a couple different ways. Let me just jump back to this project. Thanks again for all the great questions. I hope everyone's learned something new. And if you get a chance to, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that, and also hit the like button. So let's take a look. And so right now, and this could be different in every program. So if I go to my mix console here and I'm playing, So let's say I have this playing, and if I wanted to map these to different outputs in the mix console, and this would be different for every instrument, but I could say I want the kick going out of that output, my snare out of output 2, my hi-hat out of output 3, let's say my overheads output 4, my room mics going out of output 6. And this way I could have, individual processing in my Cubase domain for all the different drums. So I could still have and we could bring in our overheads, and so that's how you could get kind of multiple outputs there. Now, if we have the part and you wanted like kick and snare and hi-hat on different tracks, I could drag the pattern over here. And if you wanted to split, if you have all of your drums kind of mapped, here, and you wanted each drum sound on its own lane, what you do is select it, go to your MIDI, and choose to dissolve part, and there's an option for separate pitches. Hit OK. And each drum is now kind of mapped to its own individual track. So that's what you could see there. So hopefully that helps, Michael, but let me know if I'm misunderstanding. Okay, reading through comments. Thanks again for... So see James Daly. So thanks, Greg. I'll email you. But what is it called? Team access or support page link. So if you go to your My Steinberg account, you could just get a support request there. But a program, and I use it all the time for helping people, is called Team Viewer. So like VIEWER, and that's a great program that both people could download, and like it allows me to remotely control someone's computer. So if someone's calling me with a question, we could go on TeamViewer, and I could just, in a matter of a couple of seconds, log into their system and say, okay, just hit this mouse button, click here, and everything is good. And they're like, oh, fantastic. So I'm able to do consulting for people who, hire me to teach them Cubase privately. So we do that stuff. So TeamViewer is a great program for that. And again, you can reach me at Club Cubase at steinberg.de. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Okay, let me just... can you do a copy and paste example? I take the long way. What are your shortcuts? So, if you want to do, it's just kind of the standard operating system shortcuts. So if we have, let's say an event here, I could Control or Command C, move my cursor, Command or Control V. So those are, easy ways. Some easier other ways to copy parts inside of Cubase, if you want to, is you could just hold down the Alt or Option key and drag. You can select an event and hit Control or Command plus D and just hold that down, and that will duplicate the event. Another way of copying and pasting is if you go to the bottom right-hand corner here and hold down the Alt key, you could just drag across. If you go to the center right edge, because that last one was seen as kind of a Easter egg for people, but if you go to the right to center edge here, you could just drag across and make copies. as well. So there's many different ways of copying and pasting. You could also go to your edit menu, and just copy, move the cursor, edit menu, paste. So several different ways to get there. Okay, question. Can you explain gain staging levels that are standard for a mix track being sent to a mastering engineer, and what would be the proper levels on the master bus out if I fully mastered the track myself? So I think a lot of mastering engineers the ones I know often will want to have at least 6 dB of headroom, ideally, so that and they don't want you to necessarily do the maximizing, the limiting, running a heavy compression on the master bus. They would rather have the options to do that. So, if you give them a file around with 6 dB of headroom, most of the mastering engineers would be very happy that I know to receive that and be able to work with that so that they could put their touch and, and treat that last 6 dB as they see appropriate. If you're doing it yourself, one of the aspects that you may want to investigate is more, and it depends on where your file is going. So if it's going for CD, people will still kind of, jack hit the master level really hot. If it's going to be ideally, like a lot of people now are mixing so that because they know that it's going to be streamed on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, and they will have kind of different loudness units perception. So when you go to your meters, you could actually click on your meters in your right zone and go to your loudness meters. And as you play back a track, you could see, and this is called like a loudness unit meter. So let's say I just have this drum loop going here. I'll put it into a loop. When you're working, depending on, and there's different loudness unit standards for different mediums. So if you're doing something for broadcast, they aim for around minus 23 loudness units. If you're doing something for a streaming service, I think Spotify, their goal, and this is always a moving target, the last time I looked into it, it was minus 14 loudness units. So that is kind of where you want to be. Now, if you come in above or below these kind of reference points that are kind of expected, your material can get, and how it goes through the streaming algorithm, they may try to compress it to bring it up or compress it to bring it down, and it could change the characteristic of your mix. So, depending where you're going to, you could do that. And one of the other things that's handy is you could actually just select like a mix down file in Cubase and go to your audio and select statistics. And here it could actually show you kind of where your peak loudness is in dB and loudness units. And so you could actually take a look at your file. So, and see kind of where you are with your loudness and metering capabilities there. So, okay, we'll move on. Thanks for all the great questions again. Okay, just reading through. I see Jazz Dude's always incredibly helpful, helping people with some computer questions. Okay, so I just see I need help with Quantize and Groove Agent 5. Thanks, Jazz Dude. So just seeing. So let's take a look at inside Groove Agent 5. So I'll just do a new or just add a new track here. So it could be different within. So Groove Agent SE doesn't have its own kind of sequencer, but Groove Agent, the full version, does. So I'll just add this. Okay, so let's say if I was. Just find something a little more. Okay, so let's take a look. So let's say we have a pattern, and I'll just click on the pattern editor here. So one of the things that you have in a full version of Groove Agent is the ability to actually, just kind of come over here and program directly within. So let me just see if I can find, so you can see our different controllers that we access here. So let's say, so if I wanted to select, so we can set kind of our quantized value here. So I can say I want to quantize it to quarter notes, and let's say to whole notes. So if you just kind of had drawn in some different elements, I could select that, and I say I just want to do that, and you kind of have the ability to, just quantize directly, as you wanted to just select some of your different notes here. You could just quantize different values as you work with it. So that's how you could do it kind of within the internal sequencer of Groove Agent. But if it's for like a Groove Agent SE, it would be done in the drum editor. But the full version of Groove Agent does have the capability of being able to edit and quantize internally. Okay, so I just see I'm on chat support with Steinberg, and the support agent doesn't know his way around the software, but can't even find a transport button. So if you can't find a transport buttons, you could always hit F2. That'll open up kind of a floating transport bar, but you could go over here to the setup window. So when you go to the setup window, you could just see the transport bar, and you could enable and disable it directly there. So if you have other questions, just let me know. We can try to get to it. Okay. Okay, reading through different comments. Thanks for all the great discussion. I wish I could always participate in the discussion in real time. Okay, so it seemed more discussion with the maybe with the uh, within the Groove agent. So let's see if I still have it open. And maybe this is with the programming. So click on the pattern selection and change does not reflect. In other words, the grid shows 16, so it only allows me to step sequence at values of 16th instead of 30 seconds. So let's take a quick look at it again. Okay, so let's say if I go to just a new pattern, so let's say I put in 16th notes, and let's say I put in half notes here. So it could be that if you're looking to do, if you're looking to do kind of your step sequencing or just kind of drawing in, that you could just kind of select. You may have to it's not necessarily the quantize, but if you extend this over to the right. So now I do this, I could put in quarter notes, I could put in eighth note triplets on this sound. So as you put it in, and I could put in 16th notes there. So it's not necessarily like the quantize that you do here, but maybe this Q setting. So see if that makes a difference for you with creating kind of your own user patterns directly inside within Groove Agent. Okay. So that's how I'm just seeing more comments from Robert. So that's how you could do, your different rhythmic values here. So let's say if I want to do 30-second notes, just paint it in. So that's really kind of all you have to do with that. So hopefully that helps, Robert. I know it's probably coming to you later. Okay, so question, how would you center everything under 180 hertz for vinyl mix before mastering? So there's a couple of tools. I'll show you one in WaveLab that's that could be useful, but a lot of people, may carve out, particular frequencies. What I've seen some people do is do almost like a parallel process. And so if you have a particular effect, so if you're doing like more vinyl stuff, you could come do like a multi-band compression. So if you go to dynamics, and you could run this as a parallel process, but if you go to your multi-band compressor, you could deactivate, the other bands, and then just directly on that, on like a group channel, then you could run kind of like, spatial, and just choose for this to be more of a, I think it's just going to be under, let's say, mono to stereo. And then you could choose to have this be kind of more mono after that source. So you could just take those particular frequencies and blend that in as a parallel processing stage. So I know people do that type of stuff for vinyl preparation and mastering. Okay. So I see from Terry Dean, I would love to have a way to manage my licenses and delete unused soft E licenses and stuff. So I've seen, I think on a Windows platform, some people have gone into, some of the internal files of the E licenser to delete soft E licenses from like previous like trial versions and stuff like that. So I think they can be manually removed, but you could kind of do it at your own risk. But if you Google that, I think it's on the Windows platform that you could get in and experiment with that if you wanted to. So I see, is there a way to capture arpeggios on a PC similar to using an IAC port on a Mac? So it depends where the arpeggios are coming from. So a lot of times keyboards may generate the arpeggio, like keyboard controllers. I've seen some that will generate an arpeggio. Like if you hold a chord down, it will generate an arpeggio internally, but maybe not necessarily transmit that out to a particular MIDI output port. But if we go to, let's say, our electric piano voice here, and if we're using the arpeggiator plugin in Cubase, we could go to a MIDI insert, and I will just go to my Apache plugin, and then, so if I play this, I can just play a chord and if I record this, I'm just going to hold down a chord, and it's going to trigger the arpeggio. So when I look at that, we see it's basically just some block chords changing some of the voicings. But if I wanted to actually capture what the arpeggio is generating, that's when you could click on this little icon just in the MIDI insert itself. And now as I record the arpeggio that's being generated, so the arpeggio is being generated is actually being recorded in real time. So depending where the arpeggiator is coming from, you don't necessarily need IAC to do that. It really depends on the capabilities. Some controllers will just generate stuff, but it won't transmit it. So, I've seen some Yamaha controllers do that, where the arpeggiator is for the internal sounds, and while it's doing that, it doesn't spit out the arpeggiation out of the MIDI port. So, and sometimes some instruments can do it and some can't. But if you just use like the built-in arpeggiator in Cubase, you could record those in real time without having to have like a MIDI loopback like IAC. Okay. Okay, reading through. Okay, so I think we got Robert Platinum's different different rhythmic values and groove agent done for him. So okay. So sorry if let's see for sub 403s. Don't mean to ask again, but you passed over my question. Okay, so sorry if I missed it. Sub 403. Greg, I like the snapshot option you showed, but I was wondering about the 3 workspaces. Also, do the snapshots save for use in other projects? Thanks. No, but you could have snapshots that are set up within a template already. So I'm sorry if I missed your question. Let me see. Okay, but it says I wonder if the 3 workspaces do the snapshot. So the workspaces are more and more visual layouts for the windows, but they don't necessarily capture. And I think when we go to the mix console, if I remember this correctly, you could add configuration views as presets, but these are going to be tied to the particular project. But if you're working with a template, that you could still have those kind of access from within a template as well. Okay, so I just see, is there a way to control another VSTI with Hallian or Hallian Sonic? So I'm not sure how you'd want to control it, like if you want to program the sounds or if you wanted to output sounds. So if maybe Robert, if you could let us know on that, but like how you want it to be controlled, whether you want the control parameters or or if you just wanted to transmit MIDI to it. Okay, so I see a question. I'm using Nuendo 10.3. Why can't I find extensions under the audio tab? So it should be there, but it could be, and I haven't tested this, but it may not show up unless you have an extension. So so if you could let me know if you actually have a program that does like an ARA2 extension, like spectral layers or Melodyne, that would be helpful. But it may not show up if you don't have a ARA2 compatible thing. But I haven't tested that. But just a quick thought. Okay. So I see kind of more indication from sub 403. It says, thank you. I want to have different mixer views. One short, next on stretched fully. So, what you could do is, if you wanted to do that, just if you start off with a template, you could have, so let's say if I come here, I think let's say I'll just call this skinny, and let's see if the zoom is carried over. All right, let's try it as a workspace. So I'll just add a workspace here. I'll just do it to Okay, and let me. Not sure if it saves the window or the contents within it. So it looks like the contents won't necessarily be, but I think if you have, you could try. So this will allow you to see kind of different components within the mixer. I mean, it's not the end of the world. I understand where you may want to have that kind of set up, but I could play around with it some more and see if there's a way that, but I don't think it's going to be carried over. Like the window is set up, but the contents within a window may not be carried over. Okay, so and this is kind of so getting back to like Halley and Sonic. So one way, if you wanted to transmit, if you wanted to just take a let's say our electric piano here, and I wanted that to go to let's say a pad shop sound. So I'm just going to add an instrument. So if it's like a layer thing, this is something that a lot of people miss. So let's say I want to go to pad shop. And I'll just quickly. But if I just take this particular file here, so I don't have pad shop actually engaged, and if we start from a MIDI track, so I will add so if we have a MIDI track, one of the things that you could do, so if we have Halley and Sonic loaded up, I'll just do Halley and Sonic SE. So that's our MIDI track. All right, but I could now just trigger. So if I go to my MIDI sends, we could activate a MIDI send, and I could say, let's send this to pad shop. So every time I play one note, we could have that automatically. And kind of have those two layered together. So it's not necessarily transmitting, but you could take that track, and if it's starting from a MIDI track, not an instrument track, so it's a little goofy with that, and then you could send that to 4 different destinations to layer it up. Okay, so if it's with like specifically using flex phraser, I'll show you a trick that a lot of people don't know. So let's say, so if I wanted to, let's add an instrument track. So I'll just do a quick, like Halley and Sonic, and let's do like with a flex phraser. Okay, so let's say I have. So let's say if I go to edit, and then if we go to like our flex phraser here, I could just kind of play a particular chord. So I will, so click on record here, and I'll just. Right, and turn that off. And now that flex phrase I just did, I could just drag that to, let's say, my electric piano part here. And as we play back, so even though it's not actually transmitting, you can capture the flex phrase internally and just drag and drop it to other MIDI tracks from Hallian Sonic. Not the Hallian Sonic SE, but the full Hallian Sonic and Hallian. So just seeing a comment from Sandra. Sandra. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. No disrespect. You need Net Framework 2019 on Windows to show extensions for Melodyne. Okay, so we had a question. Hi, can I use Microtune and MIDI insert for any VST instrument? So it really works best for VST 3.5 instruments. So because they have the independent tuning ability. So when we go to the Microtuner, if you're not familiar with it, you could set up different scales. So you could say, okay, I want this to be, let's say, Pythagoras scale. So as I play, it may not actually, I'll just switch the sound here quickly. Or let's, all right, so as soon as I come over here and we'll go to our MIDI inserts, that it needs to be, to get the most out of the MIDI insert plugin, so let's say, okay, I want this to be, different levels of flat and sharp that, just like we saw with the note expression capabilities, that, the ability to have, these pitches, or we could say, so, having I think you might need a VST 3.5 instrument to fully kind of take advantage of that, especially when playing chords. So if you wanted to have different temperaments, you could say, okay, I want it to be pure major, which is different than equal temperament. So you could kind of simulate those things. But, if you wanted to do to play chords, it's going to, I believe, require like a 3.5 instrument. VST 3.5. Yeah, so I see about being able to do the Robert indicating to do the arpeggiation in real time, so it's not set up to do that. So okay, so we see Millard Brown checking out. Thanks so much. Got to run. Best to you and the bass heads. All right, that's great. Have a great weekend, Millard. Okay, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. How to show only tracks that are record enabled? So let's take a look. I think we might be able to do this. So let's say I have a number of audio tracks that are record enabled. Okay, so we might be able to do this with the Project Logical Editor. Okay, so I think what we could do is kind of tie this into a macro. So we're going to say property is set to track is all right, let me just see if we could. So there may be a way to kind of do it through a macro. I'm just seeing, but I don't see a way to select if the track is record enabled already. Like I could toggle the track, but I could play around with that a little bit and see. If you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, we could see if I could figure that out. But sometimes, using this, we could select, do something like select tracks that where the property is set to record enabled, but doesn't seem like one of the options here. So we could do if it's hidden. So I don't know a way of doing that, but I could play around with this some more if you want to email me over the weekend. All right. Let's see. We're about 3 hours and 57 minutes. I think I got to just about all the questions in the Hangout and the feed. I'm going to go ahead and start to wrap up, because if we go over 4 hours, then we have, I lose all my free closed captioning courtesy of YouTube, and it's helpful for people whose first language isn't English. So I will go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank everyone for all the great questions. If you've learned a tip or trick today, make sure to hit the like button and that you subscribe to the channel. So that will allow us to continue to do these things. So hopefully everyone's learned a tip or trick. If you want to send questions in advance, you can send them over to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. And that way we could, if it takes a little more time, we could do stuff more in advance. So hopefully we can get, some more questions answered. So I'd like to thank everyone for the wonderful questions. I'd like to thank, all the people that help so many of the other people. Jazz Dude's always incredibly helpful. Agent K for moderating, the different Hangout sources. That's wonderful to see as well. And I really appreciate that, because I have to do a lot of this kind of, single-handedly. So I appreciate all the help that the people do. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. And thanks everyone for a wonderful Hangout. And we'll see you again at the same time on Tuesday, and we'll see if we can get this wrapped up. So thank you very much. Have a great weekend.